Hi, guys. Welcome to Real Food Recovery. We are glad you are here, and we have a fun guest today. I want to start out by saying hello to Jamie, and I'll let her do the introduction. How's it going, sister?
Good day. Good to see you. I'm happy to be here and happy to welcome Louise. Louise Digby is a British Association of Nutritional Therapy registered nutritional therapist. She's a weight loss expert and the creator of the Nourish Method that helps women get their dream body, supercharge their energy, and overcome frustrating symptoms. She's also the host of the Thriving Metabolism Podcast, which talks about nutrition, education, science, metabolism, and hormones. Louise has helped hundreds of women discover and fix what's really keeping them from their goal weight, sluggish metabolism, imbalanced hormones, and a mindset challenge. So, Louise, if you want to go ahead and just tell us how you got into this field, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, sure. Well, when I first started practicing nutrition, I really worked with everyone and anyone in terms of their goals and their health concerns. And what I noticed along the way was that pretty much everyone that came to me, whether they wanted to work on gut health or skin health or whatever, they all also wanted to lose weight as well. So I became more experienced in that area naturally. And what I also noticed was that it was very often women who were in their 40s and 50s and beyond who were struggling the most when it come to their weight, but also trying the hardest. They were the most disciplined, and probably eating the best and exercising more than others, but getting the worst results. Um, so I really wanted to understand that better and help them to achieve, a happy, comfortable weight in a way that also optimized their health, because so often the ways that they were trying to get the weight off wasn't really, leading them to feeling their best, and often compromising their health on the way.
Excellent. And what have you found to be some of the biggest factors that keep women that you've worked with stuck?
Yeah, I think uh some of the main things are that the typical approaches are very much focused on just eating less and exercising more, and that can actually make things worse. Under eating is something that I see all the time. And over exercising as well. Both of those things cause a lot of stress and disruption in the body at a time when there's already a lot of disruption and dysfunction and imbalances in hormones and gut health and inflammatory markers. So I always like to flip the approach and focus more on what does your body actually need to thrive? What's missing? What do you need more of? And that might be, more nutrients, it might be more rest, it might be more downtime. But rather than focusing on what do I need to cut out, what do I need to eat less of, which is a very negative experience and, often leads to disordered eating, flipping
Hmm.
the approach and focusing on nourishing your body is a much more positive way of approaching things, a much more enjoyable way of doing things, and just better for you all round.
Uh, you know, we we work with people that really have suffer from the effects of ultra processed food because it's everywhere and in most people's diets. And so I would assume the people coming to you also have a lot of processed foods in their diet. And I don't know if the people you work with, if it's typical, like you said, they're just trying to eat less and exercise more. Is it that they're trying to eat less processed food? They're trying to moderate the processed foods? Or do you see that that is part of the problem in the people that you are working with, that they're trying to moderate? They're trying to, I'm going to say, have their cake and eat it too. They're just trying to have less of what they really want, or are they doing everything right and they still have problems?
I think there's kind of two camps of people. There's people who are just trying to eat less overall, and often it is the processed foods that they're trying to reduce down. And then there's others who are following what I would probably call a more old school approach of the calorie restriction and eating low fat. And those are the ones who are more likely to be eating more processed foods because unfortunately, a lot of the foods out there that are marketed as healthy or diet friendly or lighter, they are foods that tend to be very heavily processed, and they've had, a lot of the fats removed and been replaced with all sorts of artificial ingredients. So oftentimes there's a lot of people who are under the impression that they're eating a really healthy, clean diet, but actually there's a lot of kind of health washing or greenwashing that's happened, that they've kind of fallen for, and they don't realize that a lot of the foods that they're eating, not only are they way more expensive, but they're also really, really processed and not doing them a lot of good.
So it sounds like what you're saying is education is a big part of the problem. Is that where you start with people when you're working with them? Is it education, or is there someplace else when you start to work with someone that you start this journey with them?
Yeah, I always like to ensure that people understand why they're doing what they're doing. Because a lot of people, and I think, particularly diets in the past, they've kind of been very prescriptive and just expected people to follow them. And the problem with that partly is that once you stop paying or once you finish the diet, you're just left on your own and you don't really understand what you're doing or why you're doing it. And I think if you understand, the reason why you're making changes and how that impacts you physically and mentally, then you're much more motivated to keep going with it and, put in the consistency that's required to see results.
Mhm. And can I make one more comment, Jamie, real fast? You said something significant about so many diets are prescriptive, and I just want to mention something about real food recovery. That's one of the reasons we do not tell people what to eat, what kind of diet to eat. That's up to them. We just say, stick to non-processed foods for exactly that reason, because once the diet's over, okay, then what? But if you're just eating a balanced diet of just non-processed food, it's not like there's a stop date to it. Okay, my weight's gone. Now what? So anyway, go ahead, Jamie.
So when Louise, when this talk about undernourishment or malnutrition, or really nutrition depletion, or even not not nutrition, but nutrient depletion. We know that, at least in the US, I don't know about the UK, but in the US, the soil is just totally depleted
Mm.
of any kind of good nutrients. So even if people who choose to eat an organic, whole food, single ingredient diet filled with colors of the rainbow, they will still be nutrient depleted.
Mm.
And that certainly was my experience. I was a staunch advocacy for whole food, plant-based eating, a vegan for 4.5 years. I thought I was being very careful. I supplemented with everything I was told to supplement with. I had about 1.5 years of really good health, and then it just tanked. And it took about 3 years to tank, but once it fell off the cliff, there was no coming back. And I'm certainly not here this is not a commercial to bash vegan eating or diets. I'm just pointing out that someone who, was so careful and so planful and so organized and so intentional with her food and her movement and her nutrient and her supplementation, got so sick from not really true undernourishment, that my organs started to shut down.
Wow.
My thyroid downregulated.
Mm.
Foods that I was told were safe to eat for me were poison. And so I've spent the last year now getting my health back, which entailed going to the total opposite side of the spectrum. And incorporating a lot of grass-fed meats and a lot of grass-fed fats. So where do you stand when you have clients who come to you, and they think they're doing everything right? They're, on paper, it's picture perfect, and they're getting sicker and sicker and sicker. How do you help them?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's the same over here in terms of the soil being depleted, and I've seen many clients and also friends who are nutritionists who have had that same experience where things have gone downhill for them, a few years after turning vegan.
Mhm.
And again, I'm not against vegan diets. I
Right.
think
Yeah. Not here to
everyone's
bash anything.
different, works wonders for some people, but I think genetically, some people are better extracting nutrients from plant-based foods than from animal-based products.
Yes.
Um, but when someone, and this in terms of people who feel like they're doing everything right and not seeing results, that's really pretty much everyone that I work with. And there can be different reasons for it. Sometimes it's misunderstanding, the best way of eating. And sometimes it's that there are underlying imbalances that
Right.
aren't being resolved just by eating lots of nutritious food.
That's right.
Whether it's imbalances with their hormones or their gut or their liver or many other areas it could
Yeah.
be. I
All of the
find
above was my reality.
yeah. Yeah. And, to really address those things properly, often there needs to be an element of individualization, looking at that person as an individual and their history, but also addressing those things in a multifaceted way, not just through food, or
That's right.
even just exercise, looking at environmental factors and lifestyle factors are absolutely critical.
Yeah. So one of the things that really helped me was when the doctors that I worked with, and I had to, find my way to the right one. The doctor that I worked with, who had, functional nutrition, consulting as well as part of his practice. Um, they looked at blood work, they looked at symptomology, and they looked at organ health, and they looked at lifestyle, and they looked at detoxification, and they looked at all these different pathways, not like you said, not just the food that was going in. They looked at
Mhm.
everything, and that helped me understand how important it was not only to detox, um, but to make sure that what I was putting in my body was actually able to use. And the way they got to that place was through that symptomology, or the symptom analysis. They
Mm.
didn't, they had pages of blood work, pages of labs, but they looked at symptomology. And once we did that, and they asked me very specific questions about how I reacted to mosquito bites, my sleep patterns, my, very specific things that I knew were signs of there was something wrong in my body, but on the blood work, they're like, oh, for the most part, you're in line. But yet
Mm.
my organs were shutting down, and I literally could not get out of bed. So it's so interesting that, the symptomology led them to the place to make the recommendation to sort of the sweeping changes that I made. How do you work with clients on symptomology, and do you take that into consideration?
Yeah, definitely. We do quite a detailed symptom analysis and look for patterns in symptoms and, the intensity of the symptoms, how long they've been going on for, when they're experienced, are they all the time? Are they only every so often? Um, and factoring that in with medical history and what medications are being taken and supplements they're taking now and in the past and family history, I think we need to look at all of it because it's all pieces of the puzzle. And like you say, blood work and functional tests provide amazing information, but on their own they do have limited value. It's when you look at it as a whole that it really brings it all together
Yeah,
and enables you to interpret that information in a way that's really meaningful and impactful for the individual.
excellent. Thank you.
This leads into, you guys touched a little bit on gut health in your conversation. And, when we are working with people recovering from ultra processed food addiction, the gut microbiome is probably not going to be the best. So, do you have people that are coming to you that have problems in the gut? And do you want to talk a little bit about how gut health makes an impact, well, first of all, on people that have a heavy diet on ultra processed foods, and if people are trying to lose weight, what impact does that have, and where do you start with people, how where, to get them to have a healthier gut? What's that process look like?
Yeah, we see gut issues all the time. We do a lot of organic acid testing where we can get a good overview of what's going on in the gut. And, even for people that don't always have symptoms, digestive symptoms, often there's a real overgrowth of yeast or bacteria. And, often, very often, women are coming to us for weight loss, but there's often, significant digestive symptoms going on too, a lot of bloating, people not having bowel movements regularly enough. So yeah, very, very common. And it's really significant because your gut is absolutely linked to everything that's going on in your
Yeah.
body, particularly your hormone balance. And, when it comes to weight management, it's all very much controlled by hormones. So getting your gut functioning properly is a key part to supporting your hormones. Hormones get a bad rap, they get a lot of blame for causing weight problems, but actually they're still a symptom in themselves. We need to go that level deeper and, start addressing gut issues and liver issues and inflammatory issues to support the hormones. So it's an area that we pay a lot of attention to. In terms of ultra processed foods, they have again a significant impact on the gut. Ultra processed foods tend to be devoid of fiber, and fiber is your gut's best friend. All the different types of fibers from different types of plants really nurture the bacteria in the gut and ensure that there's a real diversity of bacteria, which is what we need to keep our gut functioning properly. Lots of different species of bacteria rather than just a few species that are overgrowing, which is often what we tend to see. Um, so yeah, we do like to start with gut health. I think it's a really great place to start because, like we were saying before, if you're not getting the nutrients in, if you're not absorbing things properly, then, it can almost not matter how well you're eating, you're not going to be getting the benefits of that food. So yeah, starting with gut health is often a really good place to start.
And I hear a lot of my contemporaries, I'm 61, complaining about, as I've gotten older, the gas and the bloating just seems to be getting worse as we age, which is, don't you think that's typical or no? As we age, do you think that the gut becomes more sensitive?
Yeah, I think it's a common symptom in perimenopause and menopause, one that isn't often talked about.
Right.
Um, but I definitely think gut issues do become more common in that time, and it's likely linked to all sorts of things from, becoming less resilient to stress and kind of more impacted by stress and sleep not being as good and anxiety levels increasing. All of these things have an indirect effect on the gut.
And do you think that, like, I'm going to give an example of I eat a big salad every day, a big raw salad, and I have found that as I've aged, it does promote a little more gas and bloating. I think broccoli might be the culprit of a lot of it too, but there's a lot of kale and kale stems and in there. So is it a little bit normal to no matter what you do, like I'm just going to pick on broccoli, that will always maybe cause a little bit of the gas and the bloating. Some people it's beans or sweet potatoes, but is that is that still in the normal range to have a little bit of a reaction? Or if you've got a perfectly healthy gut, you should never have gas or bloating? That's my question.
I think it does depend on the individual. A teeny bit of bloating and a little bit of flatulence is normal. There's going to be some byproducts from digesting food, and
High
gas is one of
fiber.
those byproducts.
Mhm.
But when it becomes excessive, or if things have changed compared to how they used to be, then that's likely an indication of a change in how your gut is functioning. That could be to do with the balance of bacteria. It could be that, some yeast has begun to overgrow, or maybe it's growing into places where it shouldn't be, like in the small intestine. It could be that you're producing less stomach acid than you used to. There's definitely a correlation between aging and a reduction in stomach acid. That's not necessarily something that has to happen, but it's usually a consequence of, you know, a reduction in protein, which is, quite common as we get older, and appetite changes, and all sorts of things that can change, like taste buds or dental health, and all these things have a knock-on effect on the food choices that we make, and then that has an impact on gut health too. So there's lots of factors involved, but I would say that if you have, a healthy gut, then you shouldn't be experiencing, lots of bloating or flatulence.
Yeah. Good. That was a great answer. Thank you.
So, yeah, that was my experience as well. The healthier I ate, the worse my gut got. As far as, the foods, right, that the page is talking about, whether raw or steamed or, I certainly had no problem, processing the digestion, and, bowel activity was great, but it was just a lot of bloating and flatulence, and it just didn't seem like something was very wrong. And for me, I've learned that my particular body chemistry, I'm extremely sensitive to carbohydrates. So the carbohydrates that I was eating was, just really, I developed a really severe case of SIBO and yeast overgrowth in my gut. I didn't have any yeast symptoms, any other parts of my body, but in my gut, they're there. It still is. I'm still, working on eradicating them. And the die-off has been, really eye-opening. But I'd say the biggest thing that I've learned about that is, what works for you at one age, maybe in your 30s or even your first part of your 40s, it will not work forever in my experience, at least in my body. I can't say that for everyone. And I think it's very important, for what I've learned, is to not get too attached to the way that your body responds to certain foods. It may not be that way forever, good or bad. How do you work with clients on discovering this?
Yeah, I think keeping a food diary is a good place to start. But just trying to tune into how you feel after eating certain foods, and whether that's physically, digestion wise, whether it's energy levels, sleep, mood. Starting to pay attention to that can tell you an awful lot about how your body processes certain foods. And the longer you do it for, the better, because there's always, every day is different. If you're under stress, your body's going to respond to foods differently. If you're having a regular menstrual cycle, you might respond differently at different times of your cycle, and
Right.
and so on. If you didn't sleep so well, then that's going to have an impact. So paying attention to all those things is really interesting, and then we can start to adapt what we do based on, if we've got a bad night's sleep and we know that actually having a carbohydrate heavy meal after that is going to make us feel extra tired, then we can try and adjust that and up the protein, or maybe take our time over our meal a bit more, chew it more thoroughly, so that we can just help our digestion as best as possible, help our absorption as best as possible.
How, one of the things that we've talked with other thought leaders on is around digestion and absorption. And we've had a lot of conversations. I know for me, it's helped me immensely to adopt a good digestive enzyme, especially because I'm, one gallbladder down. So that's a big, thing for me. But the other thing that we, hear a lot about, and I've adopted in the last, for sure, year, but even longer, is just sitting down and turning off everything and just eating your meal without distraction, without rush, not in front of the sink. Tell us how those choices impact your digestion.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It is really impactful. When we sit down and we pay attention to what we're eating, it helps our brain to register that we are actually eating, that we're having a meal. and, slowing down and chewing our food thoroughly. All of this helps to stimulate your digestive juices, the acids and the enzymes that are going to break down our food.
Mhm.
And also, chewing your food is the first part of digestion. Your saliva has enzymes in that mix with the food. So all of that just makes the job of the lower part of your digestive system much, much easier. So it helps kind of physically with the digestion, but also it helps mentally as well. You know, we know that when we pay attention to what we're eating and we're not distracted by screens and televisions or whatever, we feel more satisfied by our food. Our brain registers that we've actually had a meal, and we're less likely to reach for the snacks later on. So, it's a really effective way of regulating our food intake, getting more enjoyment out of our meals, actually paying attention to the flavors that we're eating and the smells, um, and also helping our digestion, function at its best.
Love it. Thank you.
That's just to add on to what you guys are saying. One of the things that I've noticed, of course, like I said, as I've gotten older, I do find that I have more digestive issues that I didn't have when I was 18. I could eat anything, eat at whatever speed, it didn't matter wherever I was. But I have really noticed that slowing down, chewing longer, and not racing through my meal, literally trying to shovel it in as fast as I can to get to the next thing. Because I can pretty much dial in that I'm going to have a whopping belly ache if I'm shoveling in as fast as I can, chew two or three times and swallow and hurry because I'm trying to get from meeting to meeting or something like that every single time. But when I take my time, even on that big salad that I talked about, and just go real slowly, my belly is so much happier. And it's saying, thank you, Paige. Thank you for taking your time and not hurting me. But it does hurt whenever I rush through it. But you guys were talking a little bit about aging, and that I know that there's a lot of impacts as we age. And one of the things that you kind of alluded to earlier is that our metabolism as we age, we know that it slows down, right? We start losing muscle mass. I think I don't know if it's at 40, 50, 60. I can't remember now what age it is, but you start losing a certain percentage every year of muscle mass. And so what do you do to help people? What's the best approach for helping people that want to lose weight, but really the key to that is increasing metabolism. Do you
Mhm.
agree with that? And
Yeah.
do you have a formula that you help people with that is easy to follow, sustainable for helping them increase their metabolism?
Yeah, when it comes to increasing metabolism, like you said, it's absolutely critical that we're focusing on preserving and building muscle, because we do lose it as time goes on if we aren't taking steps to preserve it from around the age of 35. So, it happens from quite a young age.
Mhm.
And that tends to correlate with the decline in estrogen that happens on the approach to menopause. Um, so, often what that looks like is changing up the approach to exercise, because many people that want to lose weight, often they're going for the high calorie burn workouts, which tend to be intense
Cardio.
cardio
Mhm.
sessions. But rather than worrying about the calories that you're burning during your workout, focusing on doing strength training and building muscle will actually increase the amount of calories you burn, whether you're exercising or not. Because muscle being metabolically active, it burns calories, even when you're sleeping, particularly when you've done a strength training workout, you keep burning calories afterwards. So that's really important. But along with that, we need to make sure that you're fueling your body properly, because the way that your body builds muscle is damaging it during the workout and then repairing it afterwards. And we need protein and nutrients to be able to do that repair. So very often if someone is following a restricted diet, whether it's a low calorie diet or just one that is not very nutrient dense, that is going to impair the muscle repair,
Yeah.
and it's going to limit your ability to build muscle. In fact, you may even be burning muscle. So flipping the approach around to focusing on eating enough and enough protein and focusing on building strength rather than trying to burn calories and restrict your way to weight loss is going to be much more effective. It's going to help to preserve your metabolism whilst you lose weight, because on a typical weight loss diet, which is, calorie restricted, about 40% of the weight that's lost can be muscle.
Right.
And then when you
That's right.
regain the weight, almost all of it's fat. You don't tend to
That's right.
regain that muscle in the same way. So,
Right.
and that's devastating for your
Oh,
long-term health.
totally. And yeah, it wreaks havoc on your metabolism. I mean, it's just totally wipes it out when you're just continually doing that over and over and over again. I know because I was an expert at it for a while. It just wreaks havoc on your metabolism, and it takes a long time to get that back in check. You said something significant about just your when you start to lift weights after 35, you've got to work just to preserve what
Mm.
you have. It's not like you're getting ahead of the game, but you need to preserve what you have. And so, in essence, if I always had my metabolism like I was 30, that would be great, but it does take effort. And you feel so much better with the weights. I mean, I'm a cardio queen, or I have been for several years. Now I've just gone to the HIIT training and limit it to like 30 minutes of interval training, and I feel great with that. But the weights really do change things mentally, I think, spiritually, just overall mood. But you talked a little bit about making sure that you're eating the right foods to make sure that you can preserve those muscles after they break down. And one of the things that I have noticed is I'm ravenous. I can be very hungry on heavy lifting days. So that's even more critical because your hunger is going to be increased. So you need to be replacing it with things that not cheeseburgers, French fries, and shakes and things like that. So it can kind of be a catch-22, but you do have to pay attention. Or do you agree with that? That you got to really, do you let people know that your appetite can increase whenever you start the weightlifting, and what's your advice to them for
I
handling
think you
that?
need to listen to that. Your body's telling you
Right.
something, and it's that it needs some fuel, it needs some protein, and probably some carb as well. We've got to, like I say, we've got to provide our bodies with the fuel it needs to recover from exercise, and fuel our workouts. So I would listen to what your body's telling you, but also bear in mind that your body might be giving you cravings for sugars and carbs
Yeah.
potentially if your
Yeah.
blood sugars aren't balanced. But
Mhm.
making sure that you are consistently getting protein into each meal is going to help to manage your hunger so that you're not being led astray. You're craving what you need rather than craving all the sugars and carbs and
Right.
processed foods.
Mhm.
And it's going to help to keep those blood sugars balanced so that you're not crashing.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, one of the things that when we work with people, we'll hear, as they're coming off of ultra processed foods, we'll hear a lot of things about cravings. And I try to remind people all the time that cravings are not only, yes, they can be a sign of gut dysregulation, but really is usually a sign of nutrient deficiency.
Mm,
And to remind people that cravings can be for food and cravings can be for other things, right? They can
mm.
be for connection, they can be for love, they can be for, even physical connection. So, how do you work with people to identify when they're craving and when they, what they do with that information?
Mm. I
Mm.
often recommend that people focus on getting the foundations in place into their diet at first, getting those blood sugars balanced, getting the protein in, because a lot of the initial cravings will reduce significantly once they kind of get away from that initial kind of addiction to sugar and carbs. And then after that, it's a little bit easier to be a bit more intuitive and listen to what your body is telling you. And really, I think what it comes down to is taking a moment when your body is telling you that it wants something and trying to tap into, okay, what's going on here? Am I stressed? Am I emotional? Am I tired? Have I not eaten properly today?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, is it a physical thing? Am I genuinely hungry? Or is this, has something triggered me? Maybe it was a situation that has, made me crave a certain food that's comforting. Am I trying to self-soothe? And sometimes that can mean, again, keeping a journal, keeping a food journal, a mood journal, to help you figure out where is this coming from. So it really comes down to paying attention, because so often we're trying to suppress everything, we're trying to ignore everything, and just starting to pay attention to what's going on can be really powerful.
I love it. Thank you.
You just mentioned people with sugar addiction. Do you work with people that have sugar addiction? And if so, what do you recommend? Is it cold turkey? Do you tell people to taper off? In our opinion, we feel like sugar, at least, is the one substance that I feel like people need to go cold turkey on. I don't think you can try to stair step your way out of that, but I was just curious what your philosophy is when you're working with people that you identify that have a sugar addiction.
Yeah, if someone has got sort of true sugar addiction, then going cold turkey, I think, is very effective, because, it is essentially a drug, and it's something that if you keep having little bits of it here and there, it's just going to be a battle to manage the cravings, and probably a battle that you're not going to win. I think if you can get it out, and again focus on those core foundations to keep your blood sugars balanced and focus on correcting nutrient deficiencies and supporting gut health, then all of those things are really key in helping someone to manage a sugar addiction.
Mm.
And it's so stressful, right? I mean, that is extreme stress going through that. And so that's why we have people like us at Real Food Recovery to help people with the sugar addiction. But how do you talk to people about stress and their health and weight loss and all that? Do you want to talk about the correlation there?
Yeah, stress is massive. And it's something I usually work with women over the course of at least 6 months. And it's something that I am like a broken record. We talk about it constantly. And a lot of people are in denial about, their level of stress or how stress might be impacting them. But what we see time and time again is often someone might be doing really well, making progress, feeling really good. And then nothing changes and suddenly the weight starts going on, or their energy plummets, or just generally symptoms go backwards, and the only thing that's changed is that their stress levels have increased.
Mhm.
And people have a real hard time accepting that it's stress, but particularly during this life stage where we are going through perimenopause and menopause, we become much more susceptible to stress. And it's to do with how our ovaries are winding down and our sex hormones are decreasing and our adrenal glands are starting to take over some of the production of those sex hormones. And essentially what it means is that when we are under stress, whether it's from, normal typical stress, or whether it's from physical stress like under eating or over exercising, that has a knock-on effect on our sex hormones. It, can really cause our sex
Yeah.
hormones to decline more rapidly or fluctuate more.
Yeah.
And, that makes it more difficult for us to, control our moods, control our food choices, sleep well. And then all of those things, of course, have a knock-on effect on our weight management, our metabolism, and everything. So yeah, stress is huge, and it's something that, I think really needs to take a priority for a lot of women, which is why I'm very often telling them, if they're not getting enough sleep, don't be getting up an hour early to go to the gym, get your sleep, do a
Yes.
shorter workout. If you're constantly busy and on the go, you've really got to, try and weave in some points in your day where you're stopping and breathing and just doing some things that are, designed to get you into that rest and digest state and out of that fight or flight mode.
Beautiful. So where where can people find you? How can they, if someone wants to work with you or wants to, I know you've got your podcast. Tell us a little bit about that and where people can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me by going to my website, louisedigbynutrition.com. And on there, you'll find my podcast as well, which is the Thriving Metabolism. And we talk about pretty much everything we've been talking about today and more. And also a good place to find me is on Instagram by searching at Louise Digby Nutrition.
And what kinds of podcast topics you mentioned, like you covered today, but how did the podcast come to be?
So we talk about things like, common mistakes that women make when they're trying to lose weight in this mid stage of life. We'll go through in detail things like detoxification and, how toxic load impacts weight management, inflammation, hormones in great detail, stress, done many episodes about stress, alcohol, really you name it. We go through pretty much everything that needs to be considered. And of course, we talk about mindset plenty as well, because mindset is absolutely huge.
I love it. I love it. Well, Louise, this has been a very interesting conversation. Thank you for your time very much. We appreciate it. Paige, any last thoughts before we close?
No, I just appreciate your time. I know we're in a different time zone, so we
Yes.
appreciate
Big one.
your flexibility with meeting with us today. But thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Sure.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Paige, anything else you want to share before on Real Food?
Oh, no, I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here. And if you want to find us at realfoodrecoveryforyou.com, that's the number 4 and the letter U, you can find all of our podcasts there, as well as all the information about our online food addiction recovery program. Thanks, guys. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.